Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time, Masechet Bava Metzia. This is our 16th class. Today we're going to be reviewing Daf 106 through 112. And this is actually our penultimate shiur for this Masechet. Next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, we will be finishing Bava Metzia. And then the week after, we will be beginning Bava Batra, the third of the Babas. Again, Baba means gates. So we are finishing the middle gate, and in a week we'll finish it in a week, and in 2 weeks we will start the last one. So let's begin with the Mishnah on Daf, the bottom of Daf 105. If you remember, we've been discussing leasing a field and the responsibilities of the tenant farmer or the sharecropper to the land. So today we're going to discuss a person who leased a field and locusts come and eat the crop, or it was ruined by a very strong wind. So the Mishnah says that if it's I guess we can call it a general makkah, like it hits everybody. So then the tenant farmer can deduct from the fee. Again, the sharecropper, the aris, he's going to pay based on a percentage of what grows. If nothing grows, he doesn't have to pay anything. But the tenant farmer, he needs to pay a set fee. Now, if the crop is destroyed, I guess we can call it an act of God or nature. If it's destroyed, so then he doesn't have to pay. If it only happens to his field, so then he pays a regular fee. Or if he agreed to pay with money, so then he pays the regular amount because it's not based on the produce. So now the Gemara explains, what does it mean? The Mishnah used the term makat medina, right? A makkah is what we call a plague. Medina is the state, the country, right? What does it mean that there's like a global, I don't want to use the word pandemic, so, but something that affects many people. So what does that mean, many people? So does it mean most of the valley, or maybe the 4 fields around his field? What if it was only partially ruined? What if the Gemara asks a lot of questions on Daf 106. What if the field in between wasn't ruined, but the one afterwards was? What if it's like different crops or different winds? And of course, the Gemara is going to ask, is going to answer Teku. We're not sure of the ramifications. The Gemara continues. Let's say the owner tells him to plant wheat, but he planted barley, and then the barley gets ruined. So the owner can say, listen, if you would have listened to me, it wouldn't have gotten ruined, but you didn't, so now you need to pay the full price. If all the owner's fields were ruined, so even if they're not like connected, but most of the valley didn't get ruined, can we say that it's the owner's bad luck? The Gemara says no, right? If it was really bad luck, then God would have left something. So this is an interesting idea in the Gemara, that if God wanted to, make the person pay for something, so he would have destroyed almost everything, but leave a little bit. And therefore, if everything is destroyed, then maybe we can say it's the tenant's bad luck, or we say that it's nobody's bad luck and you have to pay for it. If all the tenant's fields got ruined, so then the Gemara seems to suggest it is his bad luck. It's interesting that there's a difference between the owner and the tenant farmer. Again, this makat medina, the Gemara says, is localized to a region, but when we talk about redeeming ancestral land, So it says that the buyer can keep the land for 2 productive years. And if there's no crop in the world, like let's say there's a drought or disease, then that doesn't count. So we see this concept of uh, again, for the ancestral land, it has to be something that's much more widespread. For this, it seems that it can even be localized. You can only reduce the rental if he planted and then the crops were ruined. But if he didn't plant at all, even if everybody else's crops were ruined, he still has to pay because he didn't do what he was supposed to do, which is plant the field. Now, let's say again, you lease the land for maybe a year or maybe a few years. So the Gemara says that let's say a locust came and ate the crop, you need to clear the field and replant. And so there's a machloket, how many times you have to replant? Is it once you have to replant, maybe twice, maybe 3 times? But it seems that the farmer has to keep planting in order to see if he can produce some sort of crop. If he planted and nothing grew, so then again, he needs to replant the whole season. And then if it doesn't work, so then he does not have to pay the owner of the field. The Gemara says, what does it mean he has to plant the whole season? What's the whole season? So here the Gemara talks about what does the agricultural season look like? So this is going to be a nice review for our Hebrew months. So from half of Tishrei, Cheshvan, and half of Kislev, again, that's what we would call fall. That's when you plant. Then half of Kislev, all of Tevet, half of Shvat, that's winter. So you just wait for things to rain. Half of Shvat, all of Adar, half of Nisan. So the Gemara calls it the cold season, right? So it's like the end of the winter till half of Nisan, which is basically Pesach. Half of Nisan, all of Iyar, half of Sivan, which is actually right now, we're finishing that. That's the harvest season, right? We just celebrated the festival of the harvest, right? Shavuot. Half of Sivan, all of Tammuz, half of Av is the summer. Again, you're harvesting. Half of Av, all of Elul, and half of Tishrei is when it's very hot. So this is like the agricultural season. Another opinion is you get rid of the halves and you just do, you start it in Cheshvan or Tishrei. So that's what the season looks like. If people, let's say a person redirected the river away from this person's field, that is seen as a makat medina, right? You just lost all of your water, and you can reduce the payment that you owe the owner of the field. And now, again, remember we said at the end of the Mishnah that if you agreed to pay with money, maybe there's no reduction. The Gemara says no, even if you agreed to pay the owner of the field with money, you can still reduce the amount that's owed if there was some sort of act of God. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us a person leased a field for a certain amount of harvest, right? For 10 core of wheat per year, right? He's going to pay, again, 10 core of wheat. This is a volume of wheat. And the wheat was blasted by this wind and was ruined. And the quality basically went down, which means you're going to need a lot more to pay the owner. So the tenant pays the owner with that weak wheat. If it grew very strong, you also need to give the owner from that crop, meaning you can't say, oh, right, let's say you did very well. You can't say, I'm going to keep all the good wheat and I'm going to take money and I'm going to the market and I'll buy you regular wheat, or vice versa, right? Whatever, if the deal was you're paying from the crop, you need to pay from that crop. So now the Gemara explains, let's say you planted animal field. It's called aspasta. I wonder if it's like asbestos, but I doubt it. But aspasta, maybe like alfalfa. Anyway, it's animal field. That is harvested every 30 days, and then you replant it. And then the person was going to replant this aspasta, but instead he decided to plant barley, and it grew, but it stunted, meaning it didn't grow the way he wanted it to. You can't pay the owner with it because that wasn't the agreement. The agreement was aspasta. So that's what you have to pay the owner. Okay, the Mishnah continues. If you lease land to plant barley, again, what's going to be repeated here is whatever the agreement is, that's what you have to do. So if you made an agreement that you're going to plant X, you need to plant X, not Y. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Now, so the Mishnah says on Daf 106, if you lease the land to plant barley, you cannot plant wheat. But if he was supposed to plant wheat, you can plant barley because, and this is just those of you who like to plant and I don't know, and work in the garden. I know Eliza does. So the Gemara is going to explain that barley depletes the land less, meaning for the land, barley is better than wheat, even though we know that wheat is a more expensive crop, but for the actual field, it's better to plant barley. So maybe even if you said you were going to plant wheat, you could plant barley. But another opinion is no, as we said before, whatever the agreement is, that's what you have to do. Again, let's say you agreed to plant wheat, you can't plant beans. If you agreed to plant beans, you can plant wheat, because again, that is better for the field. Or again, you can't, whatever you said you were going to do, you need to do. So the Gemara explains, right, you have to keep your word, whatever the agreement was, that's what you have to do. If you collected, and since we're talking about keeping your word, so the Gemara teaches that if you collected money for one purpose, right, let's say for funds for Purim, you have to use those funds for Purim. You can't use it for something else. Or no, as you know, you collected it for the poor people, you can give it to the poor people for whatever they need, whatever their needs are. Okay, Daf 107 tells us that because the land in Israel is mountainous, we're concerned more about field depletion, and you have to be very careful what you plant. But in Bavel, they're less concerned, and therefore maybe there's a difference in the law based on if you're living in Israel or if you're living in Bavel. Okay, let's say you have other plants in the field. If they're bothering the main crop, so you're allowed to pull it out, even if it's not your field, it's not seen as theft. But if it's on the border, you're not allowed to pull it out, right? Because we've seen how people plant different things on the border of their field. Rabbi Yehuda and Ravin's field were next to each other, and they were discussing who owns what fruit. So the Gemara says that the fruit belongs to the person whose field the roots are in, right? So if you have a tree, again, obviously, I don't know enough. Aliza can tell us later, but right, the way the kids draw the tree, right? So the roots go down. The assumption is, right, the tree, if it's leaning over this way, the roots are on that side. And if it's leaning over this way, the roots are on that side. I don't know if that's really the case, but the Gemara, Aliza is saying no, but the Gemara is saying that if the roots are on that side, you get the fruit from that side of the tree. Or, I guess for Aliza, no, you divide the fruit evenly, you each get half. We don't know where the roots are, and it doesn't really matter because everything gets mixed up in the trunk anyway. So you get half and the other person gets half. Since we're talking about fields, you shouldn't buy a field near a town. It's more prone to damage. And you shouldn't stand in someone else's field. It's actually an ayin hara. It can, right? Ayin hara is this idea of like the evil eye. It causes jealousy, and that will cause loss to a person's field. Since we're talking about blessing and curses, so we have a blessing of Baruch Atah Ba'ir, Baruch Atah Basadeh. You should be blessed in the city and you should be blessed in the field. What does that mean? Right? You should live. What does it mean to be blessed in the city? You should live near a shul, and your field should be close to the city. So that's a little bit different, right? Or no, what does it mean to be blessed in the city? You should live near a bathroom from the time of outhouses. And in the field, how do you have blessing in your field? A third of the crop is grain, a third is olives, and a third are grapes, right? That is like abundance. That's that is blessing in the field. We continue. Baruch atah bevoecha, Baruch atah b'yitziatcha. Right? You should be blessed when you come, and you should be blessed when you go. So the Gemara explains not only physically coming and going, but more spiritually. You should leave this world like you came into it, without sin. It doesn't mean naked; it just means without sin. And the Gemara says, actually, you could have a field close to a city as long as it has a wall. If not, then no. Rav, the Gemara tells us that Rav had the ability to stand in a cemetery and know what the person died of. And he said that 99% of the people who died because of ayin hara. Since we were talking about the evil eye, right? People, are jealous of one another, and that causes people to die. And 1% because of natural causes. Or maybe it was because of this certain wind that causes death, or maybe they died because of cold or bodily secretions, right? The Gemara on this daf on 107 talks about different illnesses that can cause death. Gallbladder issues and things like that. And since we're talking about being sick, so what can you do to prevent being sick? You should eat bread with salt in the morning. It prevents sickness. Maybe that's your toast. And there are 13 reasons to eat bread in the morning. It makes you healthy and smart and successful. This would be a good advertisement for people who sell bread. It also gets rid of jealousy and it brings love. So bread is your friend, unless you're celiac. Okay, you shouldn't plant on the riverbank. It actually damages the river for everyone else. And you actually need to clear the trees that are on the riverbank so that you can pull the boats along the bank of the river. It needs to be the width of a person. You don't have to clear it very wide, but a person needs to be able to walk along the bank of the river. And here the Gemara talks about a person needs to correct themselves, and then they can correct the people around them, which reminds me of, the ad on the airplane, right? You put on your oxygen mask first before you put on other people. So make sure you're doing the right thing, and then you can go and tell other people that they're not doing the right things. Okay, Daf 108. So they actually, since we're talking about cutting down trees near the river, they actually went to cut down the trees of Rabba Bar Rav Huna because they were too close to the riverbank. And then he came and he said, whoever cut down my tree should be cursed, that his branches should be cut down. And unfortunately, the person who cut it down lost all of his children. So again, I think that the Gemara is teaching us to be very careful with what we do and what we say. Okay. Back to, I guess, communal responsibility. Everybody pays for the wall of the city. This is protection. Everybody needs protection. Therefore, everyone has to pay. Talmidei Chachamim, scholars, actually don't have to pay for the wall of the city because their Torah learning guards them. This seems to be very appropriate for nowadays what's going on in Israel, but I don't want to talk about politics. But the scholars do need to pay for the digging of wells, right? Everybody needs water. They don't have to actually dig it themselves, but they do have to pay for it. More communal responsibility. Let's say there's a stream. There are people who live upstream and there are people who live downstream. The downstream people need to help the upstream people clear the blockage in the river, right? Because it affects everybody, but not vice versa, right? If there's a blockage down at the bottom, the upper people do not have to help because they're not affected. But right, for clearing the drainage, the upper people need to help the lower people, right? Because it affects everybody's drainage. During the time of the Persians, anyone could take any land if they paid that person's land tax. So if a person takes land on the bank of the river, that's seen as very chatzuf, as very like rude, but legally you could do it. Later on, they changed the law and people started building fences. And therefore, if someone took the land, you could actually kick them out, and that was okay. Okay, we're now going to talk about a law. The Aramaic term is the law of Bar Metzrah. Bar Metzrah literally means your neighbor. And the law is that if a person wants to sell their land, they need to go to the neighbor. They get first dibs, right? First right to buy the property. Again, a person would much prefer, right, having two adjacent fields as opposed to having, one field here and one field down, on the other side of town. So the neighbor has the right to buy the land first. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain. Let's say a person bought land in between two brothers or in between two partners. You're not allowed to remove him because he bought it, like he's the one who bought it. Or no, excuse me, you can actually kick him out because you have the right to that land and nobody asked you first. We're also going to discuss the concept of doing the right thing, right? In Hebrew, the term is va'asita hayashar v'hatov, right? You want to do the right thing. Now, we're going to see that this involves the buyer and the seller, right? The buyer has to do the right thing and the seller has to do the right thing. So we'll see how this works, right? Let's say the neighbor told the buyer, okay, you know what? I don't want this land. You can buy it. So the Gemara asks, does he need to actually acquire the rights to the field, or no, right? As soon as he just verbally said, I don't want it, he can then go and buy it. So this is actually a machloket, and the law is he actually has to do a kinyan. He has to acquire the rights to be able to buy this land. And if not, it's as if the buyer is like an agent for the neighbor, and then the neighbor can come and take it at any point. The neighbor does, again, let's say the buyer buys it, and there was no discussion with the neighbor. Nobody asked the neighbor. Somebody came and bought the land. The neighbor is allowed to say, I'm taking this land. Now, he can't just take it. He needs to pay the buyer what he paid for the land or its value, right? Those could be two different things, right? Maybe he got a good deal. Maybe he paid a lot of money. So either he has to pay what he paid, like reimburse him, or he has to pay for the value of the field. So now we have a case, right? Reuven sold a field in the middle of his property, right? He decided, I only want the 4 fields around, I don't want the one in the middle. So Shimon now owns the field around Reuven's property, right? So it's like one circle inside of another circle, or probably a square, but okay. So now if he sold his best field or his worst field, then Reuven's other field, so then it's a valid sale, meaning Reuven sold it to Levi. So you have Levi in the middle, Reuven and Shimon, right? And then Shimon can't claim that he wanted that field. But if not, he can, right? If it's the same type of land, he can he can say that he wants the field. A gift, let's say a person gives a gift, that is not in the law of Bar Metzrah, meaning if I decide I want to give a gift of a piece of property that I own, I do not have to offer it to the neighbor first because I'm giving a gift, I'm not selling it. If there is like a warranty on that gift, so then you can come and take the land. If a person sold all his property to one person, you can't use the law of Bar Metzrah to the neighbor of one of the properties, because again, the idea is you are willing to buy all of my land, right? The neighbor only wants to buy this one field. I don't have to take a loss, right? I'd rather sell 5 fields than to sell 1 field. So that's okay, and you're allowed to do it, and the neighbor doesn't have the rights to that land. It's better to sell property back to its owner, and as opposed to, right, the neighbor, right? The original owner takes priority over the neighbor. If you sold the land to a non-Jew or you bought it from a non-Jew, there is no law of Bar Metzrah. You don't have to go to the neighbor. Let's say you give a person a field for security, right? A mashkon, a security for a loan. Again, there's no issue of the neighbor. The neighbor is not involved. He becomes the neighbor, meaning the person who is using the land at the moment. If the seller wants to sell his land far away so that he can buy something closer, he's allowed to sell it to a third person, and he doesn't need to wait for the neighbor to come up with money. Again, if you see that a person needs cash, right? He wants to buy a house somewhere else. He doesn't have to wait for the neighbor to come up with the money in 6 months. If he has a buyer now, he can sell it to the buyer. He doesn't have to wait for the neighbor. Yes, so let's say if you sold a field to a woman, to orphans, or to your business partner, again, there's no issue of having to give it to the neighbor. And now let's say you have a few neighbors. You have a neighbor in the city, right? Someone who lives next door to you in the city. That trumps the neighbor in another field. And a Torah scholar trumps a neighbor, but a neighbor trumps a distant relative, like physically distant, right? If they live very far away. Now, again, we said that the seller is allowed to take the best deal, right? You don't have to say the neighbor gets to pay you, right, the least amount of money or in bad currency. That's not how it works. You can get the best deal. Let's say a person owns land, and one person owns land and another person owns the house on the land, but only temporarily. The person who owns the land can prevent the one who owns the property from selling it, right? Because he owns everything around it. If there's a physical barrier that separates the 2 fields, if he can plow them together, so then we have the rule of Bar Metzrah, right? Because the whole point is you can plow both fields. But if there's literally like a 10-foot wall in between the 2 fields, so then the neighbor does not have this rule of Bar Metzrah, and you can sell it to whoever you want. Okay, let's say now we have a picture. Hold on 1 minute. Okay, you have a field. Don't look at the X yet, but look at the square in the middle. There's a field in the middle, and there are 4 fields around that center field. Whoever buys, right? So again, there's 4 neighbors basically. So whoever buys it first, he gets it because he's the neighbor. Let's say they all come together at the same time. You actually have to divide the middle field into 4, exactly how you see it in the picture, so that each person has, right, the ability to plow into the center field. Okay, Daf 109, the next Mishnah tells us that if you lease a field for less than 7 years, you can't plant flax, right? Flax is a very, it seems that it drains the field, and it takes a long time for the field to recover. So if you're not a long-term tenant, you can't plant flax. You can't take beans you can't take beams, sorry, the beams like wood off of a sycamore. But if you leased the land for at least 7 years, then you can, because it seems that every 7 years, the sycamore regenerates, and then it's, as if it's good as new for the next owner. Okay, so now the Gemara explains. You can have any improvement of the sycamore. You're just not allowed to have the beans, or you're not even allowed the improvement as well. So what do we do? Let's say, again, you lease the field. You assess the field at the end of the lease. Maybe when you assess it, we're looking at what is the improvement, and then we'll discuss who gets that improvement. You lease the land. If a person leased land, it isn't taken away in Yovel, right? The Jubilee year, the 50th year in the Shemitah cycle. In the 50th year, we know that all land that was purchased goes back to its original owner. But if you're leasing land, again, you're a sharecropper, you're a tenant farmer, you do not have to give back the land at Yovel. You can have it for whatever amount of time you had agreed on when you signed the lease. Again, we say that you assess the land. Improvement does not go back to the owner. It stays with the buyer. But with leasing, again, we're not sure who gets the improvement, the farmer or the owner of the land. If trees started growing on their own in the field, maybe the leaser gets, the farmer, we'll call him, he gets the improvement. Or no, you only get the value of the wood, but not the actual trees. The Gemara now gives stories of people who finished their lease and then they wanted the improvement. Again, maybe you only get improvement if there was a loss, right? You couldn't plant something else and therefore you just get the improvement. Okay. Now the Gemara talks about someone who's called a shtala. This is a person who's hired to plant vines. He gets half of the produce, but let's say he died and he left 5 son-in-laws. So now the owner can say, I didn't want 5 different people like working here. So he sends them away with the improvement of the field, right? Obviously, he needs to pay them as well. If that planter causes loss, so then he needs to leave, but he does get the improvement that he improved in the field. Or no, he doesn't get the shevach, he does not get the improvement. Okay, so now the Gemara discusses that there are certain jobs that if a person causes irreversible loss, so they can be fired on the spot without any warning, right? So this is the shtala, a moel, right? If you do something that you can't reverse, that's really bad, and the employer can fire the person right away. As we said, this planter of the vines, he gets half of the improvement. Or, right, again, if he leaves early, he gets a quarter because now you need to hire a new farmer. And the Gemara says, really, he's getting not a quarter, but he's getting a sixth of what he planted. If the vines dry out, again, the planter gets half. If the river swept them away, he only gets a quarter. Okay, now we have another concept. which is called mashkanta desura. Mashkanta is like a collateral for a loan. This was instituted in Surah, in a place called Surah. What was the idea? A person takes out a loan. He gives his land to the lender. The lender is allowed to eat the produce off of the land for a certain amount of time. At the end of that time, the field goes back to the borrower, and the borrower doesn't owe the lender any money, meaning he's basically paying him back in produce. So let's say there was a vineyard that was the collateral for a 10-year loan. So he gets grapes for the whole time. If it dries up after 5 years, the vines now become the produce and he can keep them. Or no, the vines are actually seen as the principal. You sell the vines, you buy more land, and then you can eat the produce off of that again. And again, did it dry up in the normal time or not is the question. Daf 110, a woman inherited dried vines, so you need to sell them and then buy land, and then the husband can eat the produce from that land. Let's say, again, this deal of mashkanta desura, let's say the contract just said years, and it didn't say how many years. And then they argue, right? One person says 2, obviously, right? The borrower says, we said 2 years, give me back my land. The lender says, what are you talking about? It was 3 years. So, and then let's say the lender eats those 3 years of fruit. Do we say that the fruit is really the owner's, meaning the borrower, the person who owned the land, or is it in the control of the lender, the one who can eat it? And the law is that it is the lender's ability to eat that property, as long as to eat the fruits on the property, as long as it's in his possession. But the truth is that land is seen as in the possession of the owner, right? The chazaka, the way we assume it's owned. But here we can actually see if we can find the witnesses that were on the contract, and we can say, okay, how long was this contract for? Let's say the lender says it was for 5 years, and the borrower says, no, it was for 3 years. So we believe the lender because this is another concept in the Gemara. I'm not sure if we learned this before. It's called a migo. Migo, which is an Aramaic word, means that I'm going to believe what this person says, because if he was lying, there's a much better lie that he could have said. And the fact that he doesn't say the better lie, right? He says the worst thing, we believe him, and he must be telling the truth. So here's the case, right? A person, again, the lender says 5 years, the borrower says 3 years. Now it's been 3 years. If it's been 3 years, the lender really could have said, you know what? I actually bought this land and I've been eating produce for 3 years, and I lost the sale, the contract, but nobody came and said anything. And we know that the law is chazaka, right? That for 3 years, if you've been eating for land and nobody said anything, we assume it's yours, right? So the lender could have said, I bought it. So the fact that the lender says, no, he owed me money and I have 2 more years, we believe the lender. The Gemara says maybe, but maybe not. Maybe he really is lying and we do not believe him. So that's actually a machloket, right? The Gemara says, right, the lender is going to be very careful not to lose that document. And if he lost the document or says that he lost it, it must be that he's lying. Okay, we have an owner of a field who again, a person borrowed money, he gave his land as collateral for the loan, but the owner, the borrower, he has to pay the land tax. Because of that, everybody knows who the real owner is, and that's how we prevent fraud, right? Because we see who's writing the checks for the land tax, and then we know who the owner is. Let's say, right, the sharecropper, the aris, he says, we made a deal, you were going to give me half of the crops, and the owner says, no, I only said I was going to give you a third of the crops. We believe the owner, or we go according to the custom of the place. Whatever everybody, right? Again, this idea of some sort of standardized payment. If everybody pays a third, then we go with whoever's saying a third, right? If everyone's getting a half, we go with a half. Creditors of a deceased person come to collect land from the heirs, right? So they say, the heirs say, listen, we improved this land, so at least give us the improvement. And the creditor says, no, your father's the one who improved the land, therefore I get all of it. So the question is, who needs to prove? Who has the burden of proof, right? So one opinion is the creditor is the one who needs to prove it, or it's the orphans who need to prove it. Again, machloket. And we say that the orphans, right, they have to give up the land because it was owed to this person from the father, but the orphans get the improvement of the land. And the question is, do they get it in land, or can the person only give them cash and not land? If the creditor tries to take the land from the buyer, he has to reimburse the improvement of the land, and he can't take the produce that's ready to be harvested. That's seen as separate from the land. If he's owed the value of the land and the produce, so then he can take all of it. If not, he takes the land and he gives cash to the buyer who bought that land. Okay, next Mishnah. A person leased a field for what's called a shavua, right? Shavua normally means a week, but here it means a 7-year cycle. So if you lease the land for a 7-year cycle for 700 zuz, and right, Shemitah is obviously one of the 7 years, it counts even though you don't plant on that 7th year. However, if he said, I want to lease your land for 7 years, he doesn't use the word shavua, right, which implies the cycle. If he says 7 years, it doesn't include Shemitah. Let's say a person was hired. Sorry, I think I said this is a new Mishnah. Okay, so a person is hired for the day. So now we're going to transition into talking about a person needing to get paid on time. So if a person is hired for the day, he collects his wages that whole night. That's when he needs to be paid. If he was hired for the nighttime, he collects his wages all day. If he was hired for a week, a month, a year, so then it ends during the day, right? Let's say you're hired for a week, you end your work on Thursday at 10. So that whole day, Thursday, is when you need to be paid. Again, if you end at night, you can collect that night and the whole next day. Okay, so the Gemara explains that we are discussing the law of lo talin. I'll put the verses on the screen, even though the Gemara is going to discuss it in a little bit. You can read it in the meantime. There are 3 different verses that discuss the law of paying your workers on time. Lo talin means you're not allowed to let that wage stay overnight, right? You need to pay the person on time. So you can't keep the wages overnight if you work that day, and vice versa. But you only have to pay at the end of whenever the person finishes working. Right, so when the verse says ad boker, the first verse that says ad boker, till the morning, means there's no additional transgression for every day, meaning you're only transgressed after that first day that you didn't pay, you don't keep going. If the employer didn't hire the workers directly, he isn't liable for this mitzvah, for this law. Let's say an agent is the one who hired, but he isn't responsible for paying them. Also, he's not liable for lo talin. Okay, DAF 111. If the agent is responsible to pay them, so then he is responsible to pay them on time. If the agent said, "Oh, the owner's going to pay you," then he himself is not liable. If you work for the market traders in Surah, so you know that you're not going to get paid till market day. So that's not lo talin. That does not count. Let's say you worked for a few hours during the day. You collect that whole day. A few hours of night, we said you collect that night and the day, right? Why? Because we know the day actually starts at night. So really, right, Tuesday night is Wednesday. So you have till Wednesday sunset. Or maybe you only have that night and not the following day. If you withhold wages, you're actually liable for 5 different transgressions plus 1 positive, right? The positive is you need to pay the person on time. If you look at the 3rd verse, it says, "Biyomo titen scharo," right? On that day, you need to pay him, right? That's a positive mitzvah, as opposed to don't rob, right? Don't rob the person. If you keep so now if you look at the psukim, if you look at the verses, we have the word lo tashok, or right, oshek, which means you are not allowed to steal from your employee. So what's the difference between lo tashok and lo tigzol, right? You see the next, so lo tashok means don't retain, right? Don't keep what's due to the other person. Lo tigzol means don't steal. So the Gemara wants to know what's the difference between these two ideas. If you keep pushing the person off, "Oh no, I'll send you the check tomorrow. Oh no, I'll send it the next day," right? If you keep pushing them off, that's oshek. But if you say, "I'm not paying you, you did a terrible job," that's gezel, right? That's theft. Or maybe it's if you say, "What are you talking about? I already paid it," that's oshek, lo tashok. And if you say, "What are you talking about? I don't owe you anything. You never worked for me," that's gezel, that's theft. Or last option, if I say, right, "I never hired you," that's oshek. If I say, "Oh, I already paid you. What are you talking about?" That's gezel. Again, or maybe the words are the same thing and it's just there to give you 2 separate punishments as opposed to just one. Okay. Next Mishnah. If you hire a person or animals or a utensil, you need to pay them on time, as we said before. They have to demand their wages, right? You come and you say, "I finished my job. Okay, now pay me." And if you don't say that, so then, right, if you don't come to collect, that person isn't transgressing if he didn't pay you. If the employer told the worker to go get the wages from the storekeeper or from the money changer, right? Meaning you can go collect the money from this other person, and then that other person didn't pay them. The employer is exempt because now it's between the money changer and the employee and not the employer. The worker can swear and then, right, that he's owed this money, and then he can collect it if it's within the time that he was supposed to get paid. But if he comes a month later and he's like, "Listen, you owe me money," so then we assume that he's not telling the truth and he doesn't get paid. If there were witnesses that say, "Oh, no, he came at the end of the month to demand his payment," and the employer said, "Oh, come back in a month," so then he can swear and get his money back. A ger toshav, a non-Jew who is not an idolater, who accepts upon themselves the 7 Noachide laws, that person needs, you need to pay him on time, but there's no issue. You don't get punished if you don't pay him on time. Obviously, you need to pay everybody, but there isn't this transgression. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain. Right, the verse says, "Lo ta'ashok et re'echa," right? Don't withhold from your fellow, and then it says. Itcha, right? Each verse has another person, right? An ani, a poor person, an evion, someone who's destitute, your brother, the ger, right? That's where we're going to now. We're going to go through what every word in this verse means, right? So it means that it includes the Jew. It also includes all people, right? Gercha, so the converts, everybody, and then it says Adam. So that means any person, but also be'artzecha, right, in your land. That is also for animals or utensils. And it's and it talks about the poor person, ani and evion. Ani is a poor person. Evion is even poorer. So the ani, the poor person, you have to pay the poor person before the rich person. But you also have to, this is, the Gemara says, you have to pay the poor person before the destitute person, because the poor person is going to be too embarrassed to demand his wages, and therefore you pay him first. Okay, last daf for today, daf 112. Again, you have to pay your worker, even if they only worked for a few hours, even when they put their life at risk, you have to pay them on time. And if you don't pay them on time, you're actually risking your own life, because God is basically going to make sure that everybody gets paid in the right time and the person is going to get punished. Let's say the worker, again, we said the worker has to demand to get paid. If you have the money and you don't pay, so then you're liable for lotalin. But if you don't have the money, I mean, it's not right, but you're not liable for lotalin because you physically can't pay them because you don't have the money. We said that if the storekeeper doesn't pay the worker, can the worker now go back to the employer? Right? This is actually a machloket. We said he's not liable for lotalin, but maybe he could go back to the employer. Again, that's where the original contract was. Or no, you can't even go back to the employer because he gave the debt over to the money changer. What about a contractor, kablanut? Is there lotalin? Now here, kablanut means someone who's contracted for a project, right? You hire someone to build a kitchen. That's very different than hiring someone to work for a month, right? You hired for a project. So is the money that's owed to this person seen as a loan or as a wage? Again, if it's a loan, that's very, right. If it's a wage, you have to pay on time. If it's a loan, maybe not necessarily. So we see there is the isur, the prohibition of lotalin with a contractor, with a kablan. Let's say it's a craftsman who finished the item, but the employer hasn't picked it up yet. That's not lotalin. But if he returned the item, so then the person needs to pay for it on that day. And if not, they have transgressed. The worker, we said the worker swears and takes the money. Usually when in Jewish law, when you swear, you swear that you don't owe the person any money. So how come here we say that he can swear and take the money? So we say that this is a great decree of the rabbis, because really the employer should swear, but the sages allowed the worker to swear and to get paid, right? Again, we want to make sure that the worker gets his livelihood, and therefore they give him the ability to do that. Also, because we say maybe the employer was very busy and he doesn't really remember if he paid. And because he doesn't remember, he can't really swear. But if there's a difference of opinion on what the amount is, that we agree, that we say the employer is going to remember, right? The employer will remember how much he hired you for, but he might not remember if he paid you. And we'll just do the top of Daf 113, right? That we said if it passed the time, so then we actually believe the employer to remember if he paid, right? If I know that I pay all my employees on the 10th of the month, so if it's now the 30th, we assume that he paid on the 10th of the month, and therefore we believe the employer. However, right, if there are witnesses that say we were there on the 10th when he demanded the wage and you said come back, so then even on the 30th, he's allowed to demand his money, he can swear, and then he can get paid. Okay, with that, we conclude for this week. Next week, we're actually going to have class on Tuesday night instead of Wednesday night, and we're going to finish the Masechet together. So looking forward to that. And also, don't forget to sign up for the next Masechet, which will start in 2 weeks from tonight, back to Wednesday. So wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom.
What time is the shir on Tuesday?
At 9 o'clock, regular time, just a different day. Yeah.